Good evening. It's now 5:30 and I call the workshop of the Victoria City Council to order. Our workshops are informal, and with that, we'll dive right into our agenda. There are two items on our agenda this evening. First up, our Finance Director, Trish Pollock, is with us to present our first item, which is an overview of the federal ARPA funds and our potential use of those funds. Ms. Pollock, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This evening, we are going to discuss the American Rescue Plan Act funds. So what is American Rescue Plan Act, or what we refer to as ARPA? On March 11th, 2021, President Joe Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act. It's a federal stimulus bill that aids public health and economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And how much did Victoria receive? And how long do we have to spend the funds? So of the 1.9 trillion, the city of Victoria will receive $1.08 million, and our first half was paid last July of 21. And we will get our second half of that amount this coming July. There was also an additional $17,683 that was received, which is our share of funds that were not claimed by other cities. And then the funds that we do receive must be obligated by the end of 2024 and expended by the end of 2026. So what that means is if we have a project that we have a contract on by the end of 2024, we can still complete the project and actually pay for the project up through the end of 2026. So what can we spend the funds on? So there is a strict guideline as to what those funds should be spent on. And the first item is to address negative economic impacts caused by COVID-19 pandemic, or to replace lost public sector revenue, or to provide premium pay for essential workers, and then also to invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And then they also had guidelines on what we can't spend the funds on. So specifically, you cannot directly or indirectly offset tax reductions, and you may not directly or indirectly delay a tax or tax increase. Expenditures cannot already be in our current budget, and funds cannot be deposited into any pension fund. So some of the qualifying uses that staff has worked to identify, we've explored how we feel that we could best utilize, and that these categories would fit into the categories of the allowed uses. So we've attended workshops, trainings, we've discussed options with our auditors, other cities to see what they're doing. We've conducted research, looked at our long-term needs and short-term needs, and from all of that, we have several options that we're recommending. So the first item would be the $200,000 for meter replacements for our water meters, which would allow us to consolidate meter reading systems and equipment. So for the past 10 years, we have been transitioning from one type of meter, which is a census meter, to a Neptune meter. So we've been doing it little by little to have the least amount of impact on our budget. But it would benefit the city to have one brand of meters so that we can improve efficiencies of our operations. So for example, right now, the guys are running two separate systems when they're doing their meter readings, one for each type of meter that they have. So this would allow us to also complete the transition, and then we'd be able to move on to our monthly billing process that we've also planned to do in 2022. Our Scada system is about $500,000 is what we're estimating. It's a legacy system. It's never been planned for replacement in our long-term financial plan. So the Scada system operates and ensures we can safely deliver water to our residents and businesses. And it controls all of the city's wells, booster stations, lift stations, and the water treatment plant. So it's the communication system for all of that infrastructure. It would also operate our future well number 6 and any future water treatment plant. So we recently learned that our current system isn't scalable to bring us into that future infrastructure. So if we don't use ARPA for SCADA improvements, then we would need to rerun our financial model for our water and sewer utility rates, and we would anticipate the need for an increase in those rates over the next several years to be able to fund the need for the SCADA system upgrade. Also related to our water treatment plant are physical security upgrades. So since we'll be having more staff in the building and more public traffic in and around the facility, staff believe improvements to physical security is necessary to maintain the integrity of the plant and the systems. We follow Homeland Security guidance for who's able to access the facility. And security improvements would include cameras, electronic door locks, and garage door security improvements. And staff estimates that cost to be about $8,000. And then another water and sewer infrastructure related expenditure is the addition of fiber. So the city's currently using cell data to communicate with lift stations, and the topography in our community, while beautiful, also creates challenges from a communication standpoint. So fiber is staff's preferred solution for backhauling data from the infrastructure assets, such as the lift and booster stations and the wells, back to our SCADA system. So this would significantly improve operations, as we'd be able to reduce staff time spent outside of our core work hours physically investigating and responding to communication alarms, which are very common. Not only does that result in a better work-life balance for our staff, but also would significantly reduce the overtime that the city pays out to ensure that our assets are in constant communications with our SCADA system. The booster stations and wells are an important component of our water system, as they help regulate water pressure for our residents. And as a city with lots of rolling hills and elevation changes, we have more lift stations than most communities do. So finding a way for our infrastructure to communicate better is something we staff think is very important. So that we are estimating to be about $150,000. And then the next item probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. So for the COVID-19 test kits, city policy requires employees to test for COVID before returning to work if they've been out ill. So we recommend providing at least one testing kit for staff for this purpose. And that was $2,000. And then the SCBA, which is a self-contained breathing apparatus for our fire department, is also related to the pandemic. So the SCBA cleaning system would automate the cleaning process of the SCBAs, which is currently done manually. So in addition to saving time, one of the main advantages of this piece of equipment is that it will completely sanitize the regulators of the SCBAs. So while each firefighter has their own face piece, the regulator is a common piece of equipment which attaches directly to the mask. And this shared piece of equipment increases the possibility of transmitting disease and viruses amongst each other. So another health benefit of the cleaner offers is the removal of any carcinogens from the SCBA that may be acquired during a fire. So the cost of that cleaning system would be $25,000. And then finally, the fire mezzanine build-out council, you had directed previously for us to take a look at ARPA funds to help offset the cost to build between what was in the CIP of the 370,000 to what was awarded of 409,000. Plus design, and then furniture, fixture, and equipment would be additional. So staff are recommending 200,000 be used for this purpose.
I have a question. I thought it couldn't be in our current budget. Did I not understand that
So
correctly?
this would be above and beyond what we have in our current budget. So we had the 370,000 in our current budget, which we would not use these funds for because we have those budgeted. This would be for the FF&E, and then the amount that's over,
Okay.
what came in over our budget. Great question, though. And then what I don't have on this slide that came in late last week, we had a request from a collaborative group that works for a hunger relief program. They are requesting $5,000 of ARPA funds from Victoria, and we give the funds to a nonprofit organization. Council, you did receive a copy of the email with the information on this request, so I hope you've had a chance to review the request, but if you have other questions relating to that, that email and request, Dana and I are happy to try and answer those questions for you. So this just leads me to my last and final slide. Staff is asking for comments and recommendations for the use of the ARPA funds. I will flip back so that you can still see the list as we go through and discuss if you have what you might have questions on. So
Trish, I've got a question on the email that came through for the is it $5,000? Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we could ask organizations that are within our city to apply for a grant for that instead of sending it up to a county and then they distribute it to somebody? Because I think while we can't pick winners and losers, I think it puts us in a tough spot to say, well, no, we don't want to give $5,000 to help hunger because, well, we can't pick winners and losers. But in a better situation, you can apply for a grant, and we can likely approve the application for a grant that's with an already established hunger relief organization within the city. It gives us control, make sure that funds go directly to a cause that's within our city. I'm against sending money to the county to use however they want to do it that was intended for Victoria. I'm for a grant application for Victoria nonprofits to apply for food relief funds.
Councilmember Black?
Yes, actually, there were ARPA funds designated for this type of situation. And I don't understand if they did not apply for it, or if they did apply for it and think they need more, or what's going on, because I looked it up and they had to, it opened on March 14th. They had $4 million to pass out.
Ms. Hardy, can you shed some light on this for us?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The information that I have, I did share with you all, so it's a little unclear to me also what happened with the grant funds. I think it's clear to us that the county is aware that the grant funds are available for this type of service to address this need. It's not clear on whether they applied for them. They did express that they had planned to apply for them in the future or apply for the grants in the future.
They should have done it. Well, also, plus, there was an article in the paper regarding the Bountiful Basket Food Shelf, which is one of the places they were talking about, and they funded $10,000 for the Mikasa, and they're working with Humanity Alliance, Launch Ministry, Families Moving Forward, St. John's Talheim, Wayberry, Love Inc., New Beginnings, Hope House, and His House. These all are helping people. And then they said that they are also applying for more grants. So I don't understand why they're asking for even more from us when they're stating that we have 250 students that need food here in Victoria. And if they do, then I think we can work with the organizations that are here that can help make sure that they're being fed.
That's 250, is it 250 families or 250 students in Victoria and 250 families in the county?
So
No, it was 2,000 families in the county, 2,000 students.
Mayor, Councilmember Gunderson, members of the council, the information that the county shared with us in their response was that based on whatever formula or numbers that they're looking at, and I don't know how they're making the determination of the number that is in need, but the way that I read their response was there was approximately 240 students in Victoria that would be eligible or for this program or need some sort of, have some food insecurity.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is important to note here is that the ARPA funds kind of were parsed out to these different organizations, cities, counties, to meet some of these needs. The money that came to the city does not have that as a qualifier. So, you know, Trish shared with us the things that we can use the money for and the things we can't use the money for, even though this hasn't been called out. I feel like this is just a little bit of a foggy request about whether we can use our money for it and how the money would eventually be spent. So, I think I would side with the rest of you in saying let's find a different avenue to address the need, the food insecurity need.
And is it possible to create a grant for us to create a grant for money in that way?
Yeah, Councilmember Gunderson, Mayor, members of the council, typically or historically, the city hasn't done grants like you're describing. When you get funding from another entity and then you give it to somebody else, then you're responsible to audit what they're actually spending those funds on. So it can be quite time consuming, and there's a lot of paperwork that needs to go along with us providing grants. And for money, like if it was the city's money and we were setting up grants with the city of Victoria money directly, it might be a little bit easier, but then it still would require staff time to go through grant applications and to decide who and who does not qualify.
If it wasn't a grant, do we still have the same responsibility to track those funds and how they're being used? If we made a donation?
Right, Councilmember Abear, I believe that, yes, we would still need to track that, how they're spending that money because of the type of grant that we are receiving. So we're required to report everything to the federal government, what we're spending it on, to make sure that it's a qualified expense. And in turn, if we give that to someone else, we need to make sure and report what that money is being spent on. So it gets a little stickier when you go and you get money from someone and then give it to someone else. Whether you call it a grant or a donation, you're still giving that money and you're spending it somewhere else. So, yes, it would still require us to do a lot of tracking on where that money went.
I mean, even sending it up to the county would still be in a similar position, having to understand where that money went. If we all of a sudden have families asking that are from Victoria, didn't you give this money? I haven't seen any of it, or we haven't seen any of the relief that money was supposed to.
Well, they said they're going to give it to Bountiful Basket.
Yeah,
Or do we stop tracking at right? We give it to the county and then our tracking would be done and the county takes it over, or we then now we're 2 levels in now where instead of just 1, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want this council to be labeled as uncaring or whatever when it comes to providing relief for families, but we have to be able to track the money, make sure that's being used in Victoria, and if we can come up with something else that works, I think we should do that. But if we, this is a,
I agree. I mean, I
this is
think
really
it's,
just,
it might be sticky, it might be more time consuming, but to me, $5,000 to help, obviously, a need that we have is worth the extra effort. So I agree with Derek where he says, you know, maybe not give it to the county, but if we can do something specifically us.
I mean, how is it? Because the last thing we want are Victoria residents saying, "I thought you had provided relief to the county, and we haven't seen it." That's what we can't.
So I agree with Chad and Derek. I guess the thing that I would not like to see happen is we all talk about it. If there's a different way we can fund those that need in Victoria, our city, and we all think that's a great idea, but there's no follow through. So if we're gonna do this, then let's just make sure that we take the appropriate steps that we are indeed doing it, right?
There's still the question of, can we use the money for such a purpose?
I mean, they're giving us the money for the things that were specified, and now we're saying, okay, well, we're just gonna give 5,000 of it to somebody else and let them do it, and they should have applied for the ARPA funds as well.
We can see how complicated this is getting. And it's not clear that that's something that we could use the money for, the city of Victoria.
So, Mayor, members of the council, I mean, if that is something that council decided they want to do, it could qualify as a COVID relief need. However, since we would be giving the money to another,
And there's no
entity,
way
we
that
would-
we can,
we would still have to track it. So I don't see any way of getting around tracking it. But if you did decide you wanted to do, like you said, a donation, that's something that might be best like budgeted for. Like maybe it's something you want to think about for 2023, if that's something that,
and if the taxpayers of Victoria want to help their fellow residents, oftentimes there's no guarantee that the money that we're sending is going to get to the people that we intend it to get to. You know, if we send money to Humanity Alliance or the Bountiful Basket, they serve whomever comes through their doors, and they don't ask the question about where they're from typically, I wouldn't think. And so it's hard for us to control that. So I just feel like there's other people who are better equipped to provide this service.
I mean, I would say Humanity Alliance, having been a driver for them in the past, they do have families, I have delivered to families in Victoria. So I know that there are families in Victoria that have a need. Can we take that money and create something that wasn't in our budget, a line item that's not in our budget for Cub Food gift cards and give them to? And say, that way we've done our tracking and we know it's X grocer going to wherever as a donation to them.
Ms. Hardy?
I wish our city attorney was here because he probably would be able to answer this a little bit more intelligently than I could, but I think that gets on a pretty slippery slope. So I would probably caution us away from that. You know, there are other organizations, and we've had this conversation with our friends at the Lions Club this last year during COVID, when they approached us with some food insecurity needs in the broader Carver County area. So this is something that they've been monitoring, and I might suggest that as we're looking at who is best able to serve the community, and whether there's some discussion this evening on whether it's, you know, the city's role to provide that service. I might recommend to the council, if you are all open to that, that we have a conversation with our friends at the Lions Club to see if this is something that their charitable gambling contributions or their foundation might help fund. I know they do partner and support Humanity Alliance and some of the other nonprofits in the area that are in this space and doing this good work for our community. And perhaps it's an area that they can step in and help support the community. Just another option for you all to think through.
I think we want to be careful too that we stay in our lane. I mean, we do the things that we are charged to do. And, you know, as much as we all care about this, it's an important thing, obviously, and we all care about it. I'm not sure that this is something that we have any expertise to handle.
To that end, I do have another question.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Gunderson.
Moving on, to the line items, replacement water meters, SCADA, and fiber to lift stations. How fixed are those costs in terms of estimates? And I'm just asking because if they're, I mean, do we think that they could come in under $20,000 under what we're budgeting here, where we have $65,000, $70,000 left to be able to use towards another project? Or are these pretty firm on where they're coming in for quotes?
Councilmember Gunderson, these are all estimates at this point, so especially the Scada system, it could come in a lot higher even, so we could be looking for funds. I feel like we were, when we were estimating, we're probably gonna run out of funds before we have leftover funds, in my opinion. So, the replacement water meters are pretty well right on, because we've
No,
got
it's
really
a
good
known
prices on those. It's just the SCADA system's kind of the biggest unknown. And then the fiber to the lift stations, so the 150,000 basically, we're pretty sure it wouldn't cover it. We would get as much done as we possibly could with what we have left. So basically, if we had leftover, that's where we would recommend spending the money, would be for the fiber.
And do those three work in tandem together then?
Honestly, they do, to some extent. However, you wouldn't need to have, you know, you could still communicate with the SCADA system without the fiber, because we're doing it now. But obviously, to have the fiber would be the ideal situation because of all the communication failures. We have multiple per week communication failures with our current system. So we've got, that's why we have people on call and they're constantly coming in to check alarms. So it's a real problem. It's a real problem right now. It's not something we can fix overnight, but it's something we need to start planning to fix, because we don't want to have to operate like that in the long term.
Because that's staff time, right?
It's staff time and it's all overtime, because they're coming in at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, they're giving up time with their families on holiday weekends because someone has to be on call. Someone has to come and check the alarms, whether it's an important alarm or
Just a,
not an important alarm. It needs to be checked and it needs to be turned off. So it's definitely would save staff time and just not having to have that dedicated staff like we do now.
yeah.
Councilmember Black.
How many more water meters do we need?
We were at about 400 that we have left. We are getting those letters out currently. Laura, our utility billing technician, is sending out more and more letters every week, and we're getting those appointment made, and our goal is to get them my goal is to get them done by like July, August, but we'll see how many we get done, so.
I just had mine replaced, so, and it was quick.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
went in, did it, was gone.
Council, other questions or comments on these qualifying uses? Any concerns that you want to share with staff around these? Anything that they've overlooked?
I think the priority is the SCADA system and to make sure our water system's running. Long run, some of that overtime that we're cutting out by replacing the system probably pays for the physical security upgrades and COVID tests. in the long run. I mean, that's how much overtime I'm guessing we're spending answering these calls on an outdated system. So long-term, we're saving money by doing this. So I think this is a good priority list.
All right, sounds good. Anything else? All right, terrific. Well, thank you so much for your good work on this. I know that took some research and some hard work on the part of staff, so thank you for that. Our second item is our 2022 community survey results. Introducing that topic is our Communications and Public Engagement Manager, Kendra Grahl. Ms. Grahl, welcome, please. We'll let you guys scooch around there a little bit.
Thank you. Mayor, members of the council, today we will be discussing the results from the 2022 community survey. The community survey was identified as an activity in the City of Victoria's current 3-year strategic plan under communications and engagement. By conducting this survey, the city was able to get input from residents that will help ensure that the city understands residents' value in a clear, identifiable way. I'd like to introduce you to Joe DeLolio, our point person at POCL in the National Research Center, who was instrumental in the success of the survey. Mr. DeLolio is going to discuss several key findings from the results of the survey, as well as how Victoria matches up to national benchmarks. These results are available in a PDF on our website at www.ci.victoria.mn.us/survey, as well as in the workshop council packet.
Terrific, thank you. Mr. DeLoyo, welcome, please.
Perfect. Thank you, and thank you for that introduction. Mayor, members of council, it is a pleasure to be with you this evening, especially in person. I'm coming from Madison, Wisconsin, but no worries, no conflicts of interest. I'm a Bills fan, so we don't have to worry about that. Again, my name is Joe DeLolio. I'm a senior survey associate with Polco NRC, main point person for this iteration of the National Community Survey. And before I jump in, I want to give a special thanks to Kendra, who was our point of contact throughout this survey process. She was instrumental in the implementation process development, and she was a pleasure to work with the whole way through. On. I have a clicker. Give me
Yes.
1 moment, sorry.
Is it on?
Got the green light. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you for that.
Takes a minute.
Yes, even in person, outside of Zoom, we still have some technical difficulties, some relearning to do. But a little bit about us. National Research Center has been the premier provider of survey services for municipal governments across the U.S. for over 25 years. We have long-standing memberships with ICMA, NLC, and our founders literally wrote the book on community engagement surveys. In 2019, NRC merged with Polco, which is a civic online engagement platform. So in addition to our community surveys, we're also able to offer a greater degree of resident engagement and outreach on our digital platform as well. And I want to emphasize that there's a number of ways that these results can be used. Most commonly, our clients use data results to monitor trends in resident opinion, to measure aspects of government performance, most commonly for strategic planning, as well as the overall budgeting process. And the National Community Survey, or NCS, that I'll refer to it as throughout this presentation, is our most popular community survey. It's a standardized 5-page comprehensive survey, and it covers what we refer to as the 10 facets. So these are the facets of community livability that survey researchers have identified as vital to the quality of life for residents and the communities in which they live. These facets also tend to work nicely with departments within governments, and so department heads can easily access the data as they move through reports for the information that's most pertinent to them and their department. So the overall flow of the report, as well as the structure, of the presentation will follow these 10 facets of livability. I want to go over the overall methods that were used in the NCS. So this is the third time that the City of Victoria has conducted the survey. Previous survey years were 2018 and 2015. This survey was conducted between March 7th of this year to April 11th, and we utilized a hybrid mailing approach. So for that, it is a probability-based random sample survey mailed to 2,700 households across the City of Victoria. And where the hybrid methodology comes in is that there's two separate groups that we mailed to. The first of which being 1,200 households that received 3 points of contact, a pre-notification postcard, followed by 2 iterations of the physical survey, an introductory letter, as well as postage paid return envelopes so they could send it back to us. Second group comprised of 1,500 households, what we refer to as Group B. They received 2 points of contact, 2 postcards inviting them to respond to the survey online. And the approach with the hybrid methodology is that by having these 2 separate groups, it allows us to keep costs down and send the survey to a much larger group of folks rather than if we were to do the traditional survey methodology. It's also greener, and that is the goal of POLCO NRC to move towards that, being able to limit the amount of paper that we send out in each packet. A tertiary reason also helps us to track responses between these groups so we can continue to look at where the responses are coming in, and we can tailor our methods to that. So overall, of the 2,700 households that we mailed to, we received 807 responses, which equates to a 31% response rate, as well as a plus or minus 3% margin of error. To help contextualize that, we see usually around a 15 to 20% response rate, and the golden standard for margin of error in survey research is plus or minus 5%. So well within those ranges. We also ran a non-probability-based open participation survey, which received 26 responses. And I do want to note that the results in the presentation refer back to the probability-based survey. And then the last point is that all of our results are statistically weighted, so we're getting a good overall look into the demographic groups of Victoria. And I also want to touch on our national benchmark comparison database. It's one of the advantages that local governments have in running the NCS with us is the ability to compare results to the 500 other communities that have run the NCS in the US, as well as representing the responses and opinions of over 50 million residents. And so this is extremely helpful to contextualize these responses and the results that we have as either on par with, lower, or higher than other communities across the nation. Jumping into an overview, and this is a broad overview of survey results. We asked 2 questions that directly correlate to those 10 facets of livability. As you can see here, we have the trend lines in which we show in the report, as well to the far right, we have the comparison to the national benchmark. And the first of these questions asks about the quality of these overall facets of livability. And the second question is the importance that residents place on these 10 facets of livability. And that helps us put together the importance quality matrix. And I'll point most at that bottom right quadrant. So this is where we look to for items or different facets that, relatively speaking, have a high importance for residents and a lower quality rating. And this can help us point to potential areas of focus for the community and also helps to influence the key findings that we do. Looking at the national benchmarks, of the 121 items that are included on the NCS, 72 received marks that were similar, 7 lower, and 42 above the national average. And a similar theme, we have trends over years. So looking at the response, yes.
Sorry to cut you off. I just
No
have a
worries.
quick question. So when you're comparing us to national benchmarks,
Yes, sir.
are they compared to like-sized cities, or are we can compare to New York City?
That's a great question. And so our database that we refer to is the entirety of the database overall. We do have the ability to look into like-sized cities. So that's something that we could definitely do in the future. But for this and our results, it's comparisons to the overall.
Okay, thank you.
And this is comparisons to the 2018 survey. Looking at the number of responses and year-over-year margin of error, it's about a 5% that we look for in difference year-over-year, excuse me. That signifies a significant change. Keeping that in mind, we had 45 items that were similar to 2018, 7 that were lower, and 64 that were higher than the previous iteration of the NCS. And then jumping into survey highlights, I definitely do want to point before we go into these, is that these are areas that we as survey researchers found interesting. There's a lot of data in the report, and there are more highlights to be gleaned from that. And so I'm sure you will see those and you will notice things that we didn't pull out as you look through the results and the data. But the first key finding is that residents continue to experience a high quality of life in Victoria. And all items relating to the quality of life in the city received universally high marks. Were largely similar to the previous iteration of the NCS. And so I want to point out that around 9 and 10 gave positive marks to Victoria as a place of live, the overall quality of life in the city, overall image, as well as Victoria as a place to raise children. And I want to point out the overall image or reputation of Victoria specifically, that raised year over year from 75% approval to 91%. Which is a 16% increase and notable. Additionally, not quite to the level of 9 and 10, but also a vast majority of residents pointed to Victoria as a great place to retire. Key finding number 2, the economy is a priority for residents. And though there has been improvement, still room for growth. But I definitely do want to start off with some of these notable improvements. First of which being the vibrancy of downtown and commercial area, which I had the pleasure of seeing as I was driving down, which increased by 23% from 2018, followed by economic development, which increased by 14%, and the overall quality of business and service establishments, which increased by 21%. All very well over that 5% that we were looking for the threshold. Other items in Victoria relating to the economy present potential focus area for the city. Around half of residents gave approval to the variety of business and service establishments, the cost of living, while a slightly lower proportion, 1 in 3, approved of employment opportunities. Around 2 in 10 gave positive marks to shopping opportunities, and a slightly different metric from excellent or good, around 13% felt very or somewhat positive about the impact that the economy would have on their family income in the next 6 months. Those final 2 items were lower than national benchmarks, while the preceding 3 were similar to the national benchmarks. Key finding 3, residents praise street services. They recognize parking and traffic flow as potential areas of priority. And so starting with those street-related services, again, nearly all street-related services in Victoria were rated higher than other communities across the country, as evidenced by 8 and 10 giving positive marks to street cleaning, snow removal, street lighting, and right around that same mark to sidewalk maintenance. And then around 3/4 of residents gave positive marks to traffic signal timing and street repair. These were all higher than the national comparisons. Following on the theme of mobility, but looking at it from a higher level, very similar proportion of residents rated the mobility services in Victoria. Around 8 and 10 gave excellent or good ratings to the ease of walking, the ease of travel by bicycle, as well as the ease of travel by car. The ease of walking as well as the ease of travel by bicycle were both higher than the national benchmarks, where by car was similar. A slightly lower but still positive proportion of residents pointed to traffic flow on major streets as a potential priority. And around 1 in 3 residents had positive marks towards the ease of public parking. And those were both, yes?
And that's still higher than the national benchmarks, the parking?
That's a good question. So the first 2 were higher. The next 3, I believe, were similar to the national benchmarks.
Okay, so everybody's having this problem? This parking problem?
I don't want to say anything about Madison, but I do some searching.
Okay.
And I do want to point out a trend that we saw with public transportation. Around 2 and 10 gave excellent or good ratings to bus or transit services, and about 1 in 10 positively rated the ease of travel by public transportation. And then a slightly different metric, again, around 1 in 10 also reported to using public transportation instead of driving in the past 6 months. 12 months.
Yeah, we don't really have public transportation, so.
The key finding 4, we have safety in Victoria. It continues to be a great asset for the city. Again, all items relating to safety in Victoria were rated very positively. Ratings tended to be either higher than or on par with national benchmarks. We can see that we have a number of these ratings were in the 90% range, were higher than, including Victoria's, the feeling of safety in Victoria's downtown commercial area during the day, how safe residents felt from violent crime, from property crime, as well as from fire, flood, and other natural disasters. In this theme, safety services were also rated high. So this is the feeling of safety moving into the actual services. About 9 and 10 or more gave positive ratings to fire services, emergency medical services, fire prevention, education, as well as police services. And then I want to point out this one on the far right. Outside of the standard questions that we ask on the NCS, the City of Victoria also asked residents to rate the services provided by the Carver County Sheriff's Office, which had 93% approval. That one wasn't compared to the national benchmarks, but the other 4 were rated as similar. Yes, ma'am.
So how does it compare then with the police services, since Carver County is all that we have? I mean, it's kind of like they're saying 88% for police services, but for Carver County, it's 93, which is different. It's the same.
That's a great question. And I think that comes down to resident perception as what they view as the overall police service compared to what they know of for the services provided specifically by the county.
Okay, so they think that the Carver Sheriff's Office is doing a better job than his police officers?
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
keeping in mind the margin of error around any question, which was plus or minus 3%, it would be
Close?
very, I'd say on par with each other, yes.
Okay.
I think it seems distorted because it's not one of your standard questions. So it's an outlier to begin with.
Say it again, sorry.
So is it distorted because it's not one of your standard questions?
Oh, no, that's a great question. I wouldn't call it distorted per se. We wouldn't benchmark it. So the wording to the question is very similar. And so we work to not point residents in one way or another with the way that we frame these questions. It would just be specifically asking about the Carver County Sheriff's Office rather than police services.
Okay.
And following in this same frame of additional survey questions, the City of Victoria also asked residents how important each of the following police/public safety initiatives and operations were for improving the overall quality of life in the city. The item that garnered the largest response for essential or very important was the timely response to calls for service with around 9 and 10. Just above 50% at around 6 and 10, 24-hour patrols, the use of officer-worn body cameras, as well as public engagement. And just under half of residents pointed to enhanced enforcement of city codes and laws and officers dedicated to Victoria policing only.
Are these numbers you would expect, given what we saw earlier, that people feel comfortable and safe? Is there a direct correlation to what we're seeing here?
That's a great question. And I couldn't point directly. I think that looks more into these individual items as they stand in Victoria as a whole. And so while we have that information that is the overarching, that may translate differently into how they view these specific items within the broad question.
There was no option for folks to provide handwritten comments or, just comments overall. Was there?
Not for this question specifically. There was a
Okay.
question later on that was framed as the largest problem or issue facing Victoria. But for this, we worked with the City of Victoria to come up with some specific items.
Certainly, but there's no place for people to kind of elaborate on why they said what they said.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Didn't they have that at the last? They had a lot of room for comments in the last survey, I remember. Didn't seem like we had that on this one.
Yeah, I know that there was one open-ended question in the last iteration. There was one open-ended on this one as well, but I can definitely check back on that as a
Okay.
follow-up.
I'm just confused with these numbers as to how 9 and 10 want a timely response to the calls. A little more than half want 24-hour patrol and public engagement and use of the body cameras, but then only 4 want any kind of enforcement or officers dedicated specifically to Victoria.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the first question, who doesn't want timely response? I mean, it seems like it's,
So how are you going to get it if you
Yeah.
don't do the other 2?
Yeah.
Doesn't even,
Yeah, and the question is framed as essential or very important. So residents may point to the timeliness of the response as being essential, as well as, around half thinking 24-hour patrols, but it may not be viewed by most as essential or very important for officers dedicated, let's say, to Victoria policing only. So not necessarily framed in the sense of things that they want, but more of that as essential to the quality of life.
all right.
And there were a few other special topics that we asked on the NCS. The first of which being asking residents the type of park that they prefer to see in their community. There was slightly edged over for the smaller neighborhood parks that were walkable compared to the larger, more destination parks. That was a very close split, 55 to 44. And then we also did ask the open-ended question, how would residents address the biggest challenge or issue facing Victoria? Focusing on those top 3, the top one was more of those economic and commercial activity relating items, specifically downtown revitalization, as well as shopping opportunities. 29% of our responses pertain to that, followed by growth in infrastructure, specifically housing and utilities, 15%, and then traffic, roads, mobility at 11. There was a more even distribution of responses and what they pertain to following those. And again, I do want to point out, as we briefly go over conclusions, that these are the points that we found interesting, and there are definitely more points to be gleaned from the data within the report. And something with that, too, I do want to mention that as part of the services the city has already paid, you have ongoing access to the online Polko digital engagement platform. It's a great opportunity for follow-up question sets on the platform, anything that we want to dig deeper into. And so it would be a great opportunity for some of those more safety-related questions if we wanted to dive deeper into that and continue on to get more information and elicit those responses. That'd be a great opportunity, and I'll definitely make a note of that and be following up. And with that, Victoria, as of this afternoon when I checked, has 317 panel participants already. These are folks that have signed up already on the Polko platform to receive notifications on any further engagement. We send an email out every Thursday, so they'll receive that Thursday email as soon as there's another question posted. And I do want to take time for any other general questions.
Great. Council, thank you so much. Council, questions, comments? Okay. Anything else?
No, I just thought it was interesting that as much as we hear about parking, that was only 6%.
Yeah. So, and that was that back up that slide where we talked about those. So this was the open-ended one. Nope, go back. More. Forward now.
Actually, it was at the end.
There we
Right
go.
there.
There.
So sorry.
So this
I'm
was
dangerous with
the,
the clicker.
so this was the open-ended one. How would you address the biggest challenge? Did they say how, or did they just say this is the biggest challenge?
Most of the question was framed as addressing the number or the type of responses that we receive from what we refer to as verbatim responses definitely ranges. There are some residents that put in only the issue. There are some residents that do add in how they would address.
Okay.
There are some that aren't.
And I trust staff has all those comments. Terrific, thank you. Okay, very good. Anything else? All right, thank you so much, Joe. We appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, council, there's nothing more to come before us for the workshop, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. We'll be back in 2 minutes for the council meeting.